Welcome back to FinTalk, brought to you by Vermeer. Here we discuss pressing topics in fintech, regtech, covering regulatory, collateral and digital across banking and insurance and finance. Vermeer has been proud to deliver innovative software solutions in the industry with stability and cost efficiency for our global roster of clients. With over 20 years of trusted transformation in finance and insurance, we're bringing industry's top expertise to FinTalk. I'm Gerald Akhtar, and I'll be your host for this podcast. Welcome back to FinTalk, brought to you by Vermeer. I'm Gerald Akhtar, your host. So today I have with me Brain Momoh, Senior Manager at Avantage Reply. Welcome, Brain.
Thanks, Gerald. Well, it's been 2 years now since we had the first one.
Since we had the first one, yeah. It's been a while, isn't it?
It has been a while. Still at Avantage, still making progress. I'm sure we've had the introduction about Avantage Reply, but we are a consultancy firm under the Reply umbrella. And the focus really is risk, regulation, and compliance. So everything in between. And we have a really great tech base, courtesy of Reply. And so I mean, it's hard to think about finance without tech nowadays. So it sits really well. And it's kind of what we do. So
last time we spoke about the Dear CEO letter and all the impact around that. And that was 2019. There's been so many Dear CEO letters around.
There has been.
But we've spoken a lot about theory and theoretics and, all the upcoming Basel stuff and all the changes and all the stuff that's going on in AI and everything. But actually, I want to bring this back to and kind of your area of expertise around business transformation. We hear a lot about business transformation in every firm, the same firms that you talk to and the same firms we talk to. Can we go through the concept of that?
Of course,
and
of course.
An introduction of transformation?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite apt really, because if you think about regulation as something goes back and forth and there's always some change here or there. And you wonder, what does it all mean for a firm? Imagine being a firm and taking it all in. It's quite a lot to take in. But business transformation or change transformation is effectively saying, hey, a business has got to evolve in some ways. A business would have changes, maybe courtesy of regulation, courtesy of strategy change, courtesy of, new tech, whatever that might be. It could be a target operating model to do things more effectively or efficiently. It's the process that takes you from wherever you are now to where you need to be. So that's it in a nutshell.
Obviously, transformation has evolved, since the industry is kind of in the last 10 years, you've seen it transform as much as we have. The move to legacy platforms, moving on to cloud and stuff like that. In terms of your experience and the work that you guys are doing, how much are you seeing it evolve and at the pace that it's evolving? We're seeing transformation, heads of transformations, jobs now, suddenly those roles are starting to open up. How are you seeing that in firms now? I
think a good way to encapsulate the evolution of the specialism of transformation, if you want to think of it, it's to think about it's like a philosophy or mindset for organization. I think organizations are kind of moving from the more, say, reactive to the proactive. I must admit, I didn't start my career as a transformation guy. I started doing banking, regulation, so I've kind of done the hardcore stuff until moving to transformation. That's not saying you don't do that in transformation. But I think transformation, it's more of a mindset. And something to consider as well is if you think about the rate of change, the regulation after regulation, the pressures from cost, it's no longer something you do outside of your desk. It's no longer like just a project or program. It is something you have to think of as a firm more strategically. And actually that is, it's firms to say, hey, I'm going to have a finance transformation function. I'm going to have a change function for risk. So it's like, we know this is going to come. We know we have a budget for a book of work that would involve changing for the next couple of years. We know we need to revamp our architecture. We know we need to revamp our processes. And it's a continuous prioritization, what we need to do first, what we need to do next. And so it's about thinking of it strategically. And also you got to think about it as from the perspective that you have the role of a change agent, for instance. That role has evolved because you have transformation hubs. I've worked with firms where they have like a business change function within it. Everything goes through that. And if you think about how these things actually work, you can always think of them as the pseudo R&D for the firms. So if you think about firms or industries that are very innovative, talk about pharma industries or industries like, engineering and manufacturing, they have R&D functions. And banks use a lot of IT and tech. And, you can almost argue, besides the tech business, what a business uses tech banks do that. And this change functions not only work as change agents, but they also like help you look around the corner. What do we need to do in terms of thinking, upgrading, and they do quite a lot for that. So yeah.
When we talk about transformation and change, we talk a lot about technology. That's the first thing that comes in everyone's mind, right? When someone says to you, change transformation, they think tech.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily that, right?
No, it's not.
The things around it. Like you mentioned processes.
Yeah,
and governance.
Of course. Anyone's been around programs along, we're head of the 3 Ps, process, people, and call it platform or tech. And obviously tech is quite the obvious one where people point to, oh, we need to change this or we need new technology. But technology is not always the answer, because if you think about what tech is, intrinsically, tech has no value. It is the application of tech that makes the difference. And if you're not putting a lot of thought into how best to deploy technology, you're literally going to end up with more troubles, or a more complex or sophisticated kind of trouble with a new shiny platform that still has the same problems. So it's more of your operation. How do you work more effectively, efficiently, okay? And it goes down to really thinking about what your model is, target operating model. So you always have to start from the top, like, what do I need to get to? What are the issues I have today? What do I see myself becoming as a firm? How do we operate? It's not necessarily just down to the problems you have. Your problems might be as a result of something else. So how you organize as a firm, even without making a technology change, you can also solve your problems. So
yeah, I mean, as a vendor, I'd always say technology is the answer.
Of course.
But you're right in terms of, there's so much patchwork, right? Having a legacy platform to then sit something else on top of it. That's one part of transformation. I think the key and what we see a lot of is, yes, people drive change. So it's important to have them invested in the process to drive that, but also the governance and the controls around that. The PRA always hammer on about that. And the point, 2021, they made about target operating model. The whole CEO letter was around target operating model. Even now, how much of that do we see actually being implemented? In Basel 3, BCBS 239, sorry. That's been around for a long time.
It's
how many of those firms can actually say the BCBS 239 compliance? So
it is making kind of a comeback. And it's interesting you mentioned BCBS 239, because we had I think it's a couple of months ago in July, we had the guidance. It's a consultation e-guidance on radar that got published, because we do a lot of cross-border work with EU, being a continental firm. And one of the things they actually highlighted there was, I think they went through this 7-point where at the top is the management, all about responsibility, all the way to implementation. And you have governance somewhere in the middle. And I think they were advocating for like a central approach to governance. And it's effectively the same thing. And you ask yourself, why do we still have this? I mean, organizations are complex. Banks are huge. This doesn't happen overnight. I mean, you have some sympathies for organization, but the fact is they've been hammering on. I mean, they did acknowledge a degree of progress, but there's still a lot to be done. Because the goalpost is actually moving, wherever we were when BCBS came out, you had tons of regulation then, and you got to upskill, you got to move fast to keep up.
Yeah, I mean, the other issue is BCBS has come from Basel. Basel's not a governing body.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have, but I don't really need to be governed by it. Everyone keeps coming up, right? Every 6 months, BCBS 239 keeps coming up, that same document. But until the local regulators enforce it, we're still going to be talking about this in a few years' time.
We probably would. And I think regulators know that, right? Regulators, especially when you think about regulators like the PRA, who was slightly different from what you have in the continent, which continent tend to be more prescriptive and the PRA tends to be more principle-based. It's about standards. It's about, you ought to be doing this. I think it's about having the firms mature within themselves, within the processes. And I remember working for the BOE and the stress test program when it first kicked off in 2013. And one of the things I learned really quickly is they're never going to tell you exactly, specifically what the issue is. And it's about you coming to a realization. It's about the maturity within the firm. And I thought that was really good, because it's like you kind of giving that autonomy to the firm, but at the same time, you helping shepherd them in the right direction. And sometimes they put these expectations in front of you. We expect you to do this. We expect you to do that. And if a firm is doing something right, they bring that out and they kind of share it with the rest of the cohorts. Like, you can do more of this, you can do more of that. And I think, for me, I think that's better in a way, because firms do have the challenges. And sometimes you can argue that the regulators are slightly removed from the challenges of the every day-to-day challenges of firms, which quite Herculean if you think about legacy systems, challenges of staff, motivating people to do what you do. And you got regulation on the back, you got shareholders driving profits. So it is quite heavy on firms.
Yeah, I mean, regulation is always a burden, right? And there's the ability to change that. But going through transformation, and we see a lot of challenger banks, neobanks, all these new fintechs and startups that have come through who they don't have that issue of legacy systems and old archaic AS400 systems kind of embedded in and having to unwind those. They obviously feel like, you know, you're ahead of the curve slightly. But for organizations that, you know, banks that have been around for a long time, what are the key kind of drivers and trends that you see that, you know, for them, small wins, right? I think it's where it is. You know, anyone will appreciate small wins. Yes, everyone wants to rip out the AS400, but it's not as simple as that.
I think we've had the challenger banks come, and you know, the challenger banks at the time, I think about a decade ago. So they're going to take over the big banks. The banks are dinosaurs, but I think we've come to realize they could both cohabit in a space, right? And I don't think it's a case of either or. I mean, think about how you do your banking today. You could have a Revolut account and also have a Barclays for your mortgage. They're two different. And I think even the big banks are realizing that and realizing, okay, perhaps some degree of partnership, some degree of evolution in ourselves, not to maybe be drastic or become a digital-only kind of bank, but also perhaps learn setting practices to make us more efficient in how we work. And the reason I say that is because obviously you're one of the reg techs. And I think when I think about the relationship between, say, some of the big players, big banks, and maybe a reg tech or fintech, I think more of the relationship within a pharmaceutical industry and, say, institutions of research. Okay, you know, innovation is key. You know, you have to move with the times, the technology, the things evolving every day. But the large pharma, you know, have huge R&D budgets, and they have that budget's not being put to good use. And I feel like with academic institutions, they could be more efficient. They can do sponsor research and sponsor studies. And when that comes out, they take that and that informs how they do things. And it's similar. Like if you reg tech specialist, I don't have to worry too much about, you know, what goes into that. I can actually trust you have the right platform. I can trust that you probably dealing with a couple of more banks. There's a standardization of approach. You've seen it in all the places. You can inform me how I do things. If I need a platform, if I need support, you can provide that support. And that for a bank, that is huge benefit because it gets the big bank going back to what they're good at, which is the core. You know, get on with your business. Don't worry about the tech. Don't worry about the other stuff. We'll do that for you. Just get on. You know, that's really vital. And you keep up with the innovation.
Do you reckon that part of it, the challenger bank has kind of disrupted the market and made this transformation happen in some of the older banks to allow that competition?
I think it's a combination of things. I think the challenger banks were due to happen anyway. I think technology is the disruptor as opposed to the challenger bank. And if we think about not just from a business offering perspective, we think about the tech itself. Cloud is a huge component where banks begin to think, well, there are quite a few things we've not been able to do and we want to be able to, we are able to do now because the big banks think it sits on tons of data. And I don't know if you probably remember about a decade ago, we had the data lake program where every bank was like, had this sea of data where no one knew what to do with. They just know, okay, we've got data, we're going to put it somewhere and think of what to do with it. And now you got cloud, you got, you know, the processing power, you've got the storage capacity, you've got all that stuff. And people are thinking, well, hang on, you're going from lakes to clouds now, right? So it's a great analogy if you think about it. And it's effectively, we can do a lot more with the data we've collated all this time. So the banks are able to do that because they've got the history, they've got the data. I mean, challenger banks can't do that. They don't have that data. So it's not just a disruption of, hey, the challenger banks changing things, but I think the real true disruptor here is the technology that's enabling new ways of doing pretty much all things.
From a vendor point of view, we see a lot more discussions around cloud, moving to the cloud, moving our stuff. You know, we're cloud agnostic anyway. So are you seeing a lot more of that? I mean, I've saw a lot more of that since the last 5 years or so, that increase in that chat about let's move to the cloud. That fear of security. Before it was all about security. It's not secure. Yes. But now, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, we're seeing a lot more of that and a lot more banks moving to that. Is that something that's being echoed in what you're doing as well? Of
course. And I think a few things that are driving that in my mind. I mean, just to say, we have a cloud and financial services survey, which we do every 2 years in Vantage. And I think we're due to have one release pretty soon where we go into in-depth survey analysis and speaking to lots of firms. And we do drive quite a number of insight from that. And I think one of the things when I compare, so like the results we had 2 years ago and what we have, there's been a shift when people thinking, oh, a cloud first solution. Okay, we're going to go to cloud, whatever problems we have. I quite remember this in HSBC when I worked at HSBC. It's like at some point, it's like in financial solution, whatever you wanted, can you go to cloud? So it's more like we got to justify this shiny tool as opposed to what is the best way to get into cloud? Because cloud, I'm sure you know, it's not just about putting stuff in cloud. It's about the efficiency, how it's organized, how your security is managed, at rest, transit, all that stuff needs to be thought about. And for me, it's about, yes, cloud has great potential. It can definitely revamp things. It can help you be more cost efficient, but it could also, if not properly planned, you might not get the benefits like you should. So it's like everything. It's how you use it. It's how you think, thought you put into it, and you get what you put into it, really.
Yeah, very much like everything, isn't it? There's no point having a Ferrari and you've got a Ford Fiesta engine against it. So it's, it's useless.
Yeah, of course.
Just to kind of go back onto the transformation part of it, what are your kind of key success tips and best practices that you would kind of communicate back to your clients, just as some free advice?
So I think when it comes to best success, like best practice and success tips, when it comes to transformation, is something that happens with every organization, whether you realize it or not. Nothing stands still. You got to evolve. You got to keep up. And one of the things I'll say is, I'm not going to take constants for things like, what your style of program management and stuff. Those for me are kind of irrelevant, because when it comes down to it, right? Not to say you don't need good program management and stuff. When it comes down to it, you can have the best program management or manager in the world, and still nothing works, because if you come in head on against a culture that doesn't fit a style, I think you're never going to succeed. I think the first things first is the culture. If I come into a place and given a piece of transformation work, I want to understand the rationale behind it. I want to understand, what's the culture change? How do people understand my presence? Why am I here? Am I here to help you, or am I here to, sometimes you actually have a situations where transformation, it's not something that's talked a lot about. And when you go into a firm to do transformation, you're given a couple of guys who see this as a side job, and they're not taking responsibility for this, right? They're not going to take it serious enough. It's almost like, it's not part of my scorecard. I don't really care. I'm just helping you out type thing. So the attitude is very important for me. And I think that also means everyday staff think of themselves as change agent. So if you see an issue, if you see a problem and you think, well, this is something we can add to a list, perhaps we can have risk or finance change, look at it, add to the book of work. Perhaps we could be more efficient, X, Y, Z. So it's having that mentality and how people think about change. I think for me, it's a key thing. So I think really getting culture right, and everything kind of falls into place. And with the culture, obviously that ties in with the governance of it. And also you have things like, if the governance is right, the culture is right, taking stock of your infrastructure, what sort of infrastructure. If you have alien infrastructure, obviously cloud is a solution you can look into. But all that is, for me, secondary to really thinking about the culture, governance, and where you ought to be. Then you can think about the operating model approach, really thinking, not just reacting, so to speak. Like, we're here today, we've been here for the last 10 years. Where do we want to be? What sort of organization we want to be? What do we want for our processes? What do we want for our people? What do we want for our platforms? Have a proper think. It's nothing to be rushed. And when you have that clarity, then you can take that bits by bits. You can have book of works and program of work that could be 3, 4, 5 year long. And you got to stay the course. You got to stay committed to actually making that difference in your organization.
Yeah, I think that's a good roundup. So you say culture brings clarity.
Absolutely.
I think
absolutely,
that's, if everyone's on board with the change of where the direction of travel is, then you're pulling in one direction. You're not pulling in multiple different directions. That obviously then ties up the governance part of it, and then the infrastructure naturally will fall into place if everyone's kind of pulling in that right direction. Brain, that's been really useful. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
I really appreciate that. And
I
hope that we can talk a bit more about transformation in the future and finally bed down the BCB S239.
I don't think it's going anywhere now. But I think it's good. I think it's one of those things that keeps the standards high and get firms on the front foot to getting better. There's always room for improvement. And I think that spectrum would continue, and hopefully it does.
There's always going to be change, isn't there? There's always going to be change. There's always going to be places to improve. You're not going to be able to do it in one hit, I think, if the program is right. And yeah, investment's key. Investment culture, that narrows down governance. you got the tech, got the people, then you're onto a winner, right?
Hopefully with the help of Vimeg and Advantage.
Exactly. It's a winning combination there.
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.